morning. Yeah, my name's Jerry and I'm an addict, and for some reason they've asked me to come and talk to you. And I was talking to a friend of mine in the week and saying, I've never done a speech before, ever. And I'm quite nervous about it. And she said, well, don't be worried, because when you do a speech, what you've got to do when you walk on the stage, like now, is you've got to remember that they're all on your side and they really want to learn from you. And I was like, yeah, but you don't know this audience. Right? Because I used to be here, and I remember Sunday mornings, and you've got to be here, and it's like I'm the only thing between here and what you've got going on. So I'm going to do my best to make it entertaining and not too dry. And I was just talking to PJ, who I think I was PJ's first ever tutee when I came here. He was 21, I think, and I was saying to him the last time, this is kind of freaky because I've been having nightmares for like 40 years now that I'm back at Bryanston and I'm dressed like this and I've got tattoos and I've got to follow rules and I've got to get up at certain times a day, and now it's coming true. But the last time I was on this stage, I think would have been in '82, just before I left, and there was a teacher who's left now, so you guys won't know him, called Quentin Craddock. And Quentin used to love doing assemblies, school assemblies, and he was set up here and we had it all planned. We came in that door, and this has all changed because you couldn't get a motorbike down here anymore. But we came through that door on motorbikes, at least one or two motorbikes. I don't know where we got them from. And we were wearing black balaclavas, and we came down here and we put a sack on Quentin's head and we bundled him out there and threw him in the bushes. So now I can admit that it was me. Thank you. But like I said, I'm quite nervous, so I wondered, has anyone got a cigarette? Come on, hands up who's got tobacco. PJ said there'd be an amnesty. All right, as long as you know that I know you've got some of you got some somewhere. So let me get the boring stuff over with. I called this Confessions of a Dopamine Fiend. I'm a therapist, but I've got a long history of not just working with addiction, but of being an addict. So the only thing I really know about is my own experience. I'm not very clinical and I'm not very academic at all. But the first bit that I thought, well, what I should talk to you about is this thing called dopamine. And dopamine is at the foot of all addiction, right? You'll think it's heroin, you'll think it's tobacco, you think it's alcohol. It's not. It's dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and I had to go and look that up because I didn't realize I didn't know what a neurotransmitter was. But it's a neurotransmitter that is triggered when you experience something pleasurable, right? So ice cream, chocolate, heroin, alcohol, sex, whatever it might be, Facebook. And that's really what people get hooked on, is dopamine in their system that's coming from their brain. Hold on a minute. So that's the technical bit. That's me, aged 4 probably. And it's weird because I know a lot of people say they don't remember their childhoods very well. I remember mine vividly. And I remember that photograph being taken. So when I turn my head away, you can't hear me, can you? I remember that photograph being taken, and as you can see, I look fairly angry. And so my parents had dressed me up in this outfit, and my father, who I didn't really know, and I still don't know, he was kind of very in and out of my life. He was an alcoholic and quite a sex addict and an alcoholic. He was quite a violent man. And they dressed me up, and he'd brought me this gun, and I remember them photographing me and me smashing it to pieces immediately afterwards. My mum is also an addict of prescription drugs, which in the 60s, which is when this was taken, were called Mother's Little Helper, because it was pretty common for housewives in those days to be on them. So, see, this is PJ. When I first went there, showing early signs of his drinking problem. And like I said, I was his first tutee. And I think we were just saying, probably the only teacher from when I was here, but I'm very fond of PJ. He was a good guy. He really looked after me and definitely saved me from expulsion on a lot of occasions. The next thing I put in, which is really relevant to me, but I don't know if you guys wear them anymore. I can't see anyone wearing monkey boots. You don't even know what they are, do you? Monkey boots meant you were a smoker. That was the uniform, right? So if you were sporty, you wore kickers. If you were arty, which actually I was arty, you wore DMs, like my daughter's wearing today. But if you were a smoker, you wore monkey boots, and that was what you needed. And I begged and begged my parents for a pair of monkey boots, and it took me again. But they're horrible shoes. I was like, I know, but I want them. I can't tell you why. Then this is. I was looking at this. I was thinking it looks like it's in black and white, right? But it's not. That's a full color picture. It's just the 70s were really black and white at Bryanston, and. Everyone in those days had to have a kind of uniform penis haircut. So even the girls, I got the same haircuts. And I was looking at this. I mean, this is clearly signs of some kind of amphetamine psychosis going on there. But that's me, which you clearly, right? You can get that. That's me in '78, I think. I can't remember anyone else's names in that picture. But if you look at the angle of my head, I don't quite know what's going on there, but I noticed the next photograph, the angle of my head's the same, and I've dyed my hair ginger there, which got me into a lot of trouble. I didn't do it on purpose either, it was a mistake. And that was taken just outside here. The dress code was different in those days. I've no idea what we dressed up. That's my friend Robbie, he's sitting on a mobile toilet. And that's my friend Will, who I'm going to have lunch with later. I met Will in 1978, yeah. We started at the same time. And that's me, that's Will. He's always blurry. Probably about the same time, you notice we've all got the penis haircut still. And then the first thing we did when we left school, as Perrin, PJ. First thing we did when we left school was get rid of the penis haircuts and shave our hair into mohawks, that's me cutting Will's hair. That's me and him now. I can't get any kind of haircut, but he still looks a bit like a knob. And if there was ever any photograph to show you don't do drugs or anything like that, this is it. That's me back then, and that's him, and that's us more recently. Will had a terrible hangover, if I remember correctly. So the next photograph is, I was saying, when you go into the Jeffries room, when we arrived at the security hut, there was no security hut when I was last here. They said, go through the Jeffries room. So we walked up to the Jeffries room, and I was saying to my daughters, you can't drive a car in here anymore. So that's a bunch of us, again, with balaclavas. And behind us, you can't really see it because it's a really bad photograph, is the car of the biology teacher, which we drove through the Jeffries room because there wasn't that glass thing, and up into the main hall and parked it one night. This has not really anything to do with addiction, apart from the fact that by then I was already a drug addict because I was on Ritalin. So I used to go up to I don't know where the San is anymore, I used to be up on that hill. My dealer was a really nice lady called Sister Becca Legg, and I'd go and get some Ritalin off her every morning. So I think this, because that's me, hold on, I'm going to show you something. Oh no. It's a long time since I put one of these on. So in case you don't recognize me. But the funny thing, it really amused me, the funny thing about that photo is they brought a book out about 10 years ago, like a big coffee table book. And I looked through it, I thought they're never going to put that picture in. That picture's in the book. It's like History of Bryanston, which I thought was really brave of them to put it in. But in the photo in the book, I'm shaking my fist, and they've actually taken the time to Photoshop my finger out, because obviously they think the finger, which for me, we used to call it the young citizen salute, right? For me, the finger's an act of defiance. This is an act of violence. So I thought that was a shame. But I was definitely defiant by then, and I think I was I didn't have, a lot of people didn't, there was a lot of, when I was here, there were a lot of people going, oh, I hate this school, I'd be really looking forward to leaving. I didn't hate the school, and I'm glad I went here, looking back on it. But I wouldn't have gotten at any school, because what turned out later was I was dyslexic, which I didn't know. And so I think that's why they put me on Ritalin, just because they thought I was stupid. And the Ritalin was supposed to pep me up, but Ritalin, for, I don't know, maybe some of you are on it, it's quite a powerful drug. And let me see, what is it? Ritalin possesses some structural and pharmacological similarities to cocaine, though it is less potent and longer in duration. Psychotic symptoms from long-term Ritalin use can include hearing voices, visual hallucinations, urges to harm oneself, severe anxiety, euphoria, grandiosity, paranoid delusions, confusion, increased aggression, and instability. I don't know if I got any of them, probably all of them, but what I did start doing was I started smoking weed, which was probably an act of defiance and also to take the edge off the speed, because I remember sitting in this hall grinding my teeth and being quite uptight on this stuff that they used to give me. So I had a bit of an attitude by then, although to be honest this was just a bit of silly fun really. But when I left Bryanston, that's what I looked like. And what shocks me about that photo is not how young I look, it's how old the bus looks. It makes me realise how old I am. But I left here, and the next place I moved to was in the East End of London. So I went straight from here, and the conditions here were quite basic compared with what I think you guys live in. But nevertheless, this is where I went to next, which looks like a bomb site, and that's because it was a bomb site. Me and my friends moved in there, and I've got to tell you, for me it was paradise, just because we were free and we could do whatever we wanted. And these were in the days where you could squat in London, so you didn't have to pay rent or anything like that. You just moved in. This was the same place. I think, yeah, my flat was one of these with the wooden boards on the window. And all of these other ones, they were like 24-hour drug supermarkets. You could get anything there in those days. We weren't into anything heavy. I never got into anything particularly heavy. We just smoked too much dope. Which, actually I hadn't planned this, but that's an interesting one. So dope, weed, is something that's very common now. It wasn't very common then. But I often talk to parents of people your age, who are my age, and they're going, yeah, my kid's smoking a bit of weed, and it's not a big deal though, is it? Because it's just weed. And I would say to them, well, it's very different to what we smoked when we were kids. It made you a bit sleepy, or actually it usually just made you eat lots of pizza. But nowadays they've got this stuff called skunk, which is grown in laboratories, and it's a whole different thing. And this is why people of your age are becoming psychotic, because it really messes your head up. So just say no. The next shot is me and a woman called Janan Kuba, who was 2 years below me, and we were together for 15 years, and we got 2 kids who are right here, but I'm not going to make you stand up, but they are. And the reason I put that in is because when you're in a drug scene, it's very difficult because everybody in your world takes drugs, right? So it becomes normalized. And I used to walk around the street smoking dope because I forgot it was illegal, because we lived in these crazy estates full of drug dealers, and it became just a kind of daily thing for us. And it was Janan, bless her, who said to me, Jerry, you're an addict, you're a drug addict. And that was a really powerful moment for me, because in amongst all my friends, she was the only person who actually challenged me. And this was a time when we were doing the whole kind of sex, drugs, rock and roll thing. That, you won't be able to see his face. PJ, that's Benny Trickett. I think he was expelled for attempted alcoholism from here. Not long after me. So the whole of my band was really made up from people who went to Bryanston. That's me. I put this in because that was the morning after the best night of my life. I was touring in Holland. We'd done a gig in Amsterdam, and I remember catching the moment, going, "This is probably one of the best moments of my life." And I look back, and it was. But of course, the next day was one of the worst days of my life, because that's what happens when you take drugs: is you have a come down. That's because I looked into this. your brain stops producing the dopamine because you're taking whatever substance that boosts the dopamine, and then when you don't take the substance, you don't have any, so you have a really hard time afterwards. So that was probably in my mid-20s. I still play music, it's just I've swapped the kind of young Elvis look for the old Dumbledore look. When I hit 28, and I don't know why, one day, because my routine then was, I'd smoke dope all day, I'd go to bed at night, I'd roll a joint, I'd smoke half of it, but I wouldn't be able to smoke all of it. I'd put it in the ashtray and think, right, tomorrow I'm not going to smoke, and then I'd wake up the next morning and it would be in the ashtray, and I'd think, well, shame to waste that one, so I would start the day. And one day I woke up when I was 28, and I thought, I didn't even think, I just didn't do it anymore. Some switch in my brain flipped. When I left here, I remember going to some careers advisor, I can't remember who it was in those days, and he went, well, Jerry, you're unemployable. And I thought, cool. Great, that means I don't have to get a job. So I'd spent 10 years, playing music and living a fun life. But I hit 28, and something in me flipped. And so I stopped that, and I trained to become a therapist, because I went and saw a therapist to deal with my drug problem. And within about 2 sessions, I remember thinking, so if I do this as a job, then all those disasters, and having been a drug addict suddenly becomes a qualification rather than the series of disasters. So I retrained, and I took a much more conventional job as a psychotherapist. And I put this in here because I was talking to my girlfriend yesterday morning, who's also here, and she said, but I think there's a danger with all these photos of you living this rock and roll life that you're going to glamorize it. And it's not my intention to glamorize it. My intention is to try and make it not boring, because it'd be so easy to come up here and give you a whole bunch of stats. So I put this in, because that's me on my 50th birthday. And with a bunch, that woman is the daughter of the guy who was the second master when I was here, hundreds of years ago. So I'm still friends with a lot of people from Bryanston. And this is my friend Lucky. And just as a kind of sobering part of the talk, I should say that on Friday night, Lucky's daughter, who's 21, was found dead in a hotel room. And we still don't know exactly what that was, but it was definitely drug-related. So I consider myself one of the lucky ones, right? I got in, I got out, I had some fun, I had some really bad times as well, which I haven't bored you with. Because if you're a depressive and you take drugs, and I'm using drugs because that's my experience, but Facebook, mobile phones, computers, the internet, all of this stuff is addictive if it gives you a buzz. And some of you might feel that already, a kind of compulsion. I don't know what the regulations are here with someone said no phones, so you've clearly got phones. They're very addictive, these things. And the people who manufacture them know they're addictive, and they want you to buy them. So there's something in advertising where they try and identify the crave factor, which is a kind of nice term for how addictive it is. Because if they can get you hooked on their particular mobile phone, or their brand, or their trainers, or whatever, then you're going to buy them, right? So advertising used to all be focus groups. Now it's neuroscience. So they're employing neuroscientists to find out how to hook people the fastest. That's me at work in, where's that? Australia, in front of, there's a huge field of heroin. Very well-behaved people in Australia, maybe because they've got this history of being convicts or something, but when I was stood there, all the cars going by are beeping, and I said to my friend, why are they beeping? He's like, because you're not supposed to stand near this. But apparently it's a huge opium industry. And I guess the point is there's good uses and bad uses for everything. Right? When you go to the dentist or when you have an operation, we need things like heroin. We need things like cocaine to numb the pain. But when they escape from the lab, they're not so good. So the Oxford English Dictionary, this is back to the more technical stuff, defines addiction as a person who's addicted to a particular substance, typically an illegal drug. Right? As I've just said, it's not just drugs, and I think drug addicts become almost demonized because they take the focus away from all the other addictions. It's not that they're not, unwell people with terrible problems, but I'm almost guilty of doing it here. I'm talking a lot about drugs, but the addiction's a far broader thing than that. And then we got people like, what's her name? She didn't go here, did she? Before I slag her off. Kate Middleton. I mean, you got people like her who were obviously chosen as ambassadors, and it's not the best picture. They're chosen as ambassadors, and she's giving a good message. But what I found about this was, I thought, I'm not sure about this statement. Addiction is a hugely complex, that's true, and destructive disease. I'm not convinced it's a disease. I think it's learned, and its impact can be devastating. Well, clearly, all too often, lives and families can be shattered by it. To me, although she's obviously doing an important job, I thought it was a little bit patronizing and generic. And sorry, I'm way out of touch with my notes. Yeah, the whole disease thing is worth talking about. Is addiction a disease? They talk about that in 12-step fellowships, that addiction is a disease. They also talk about it being genetic. I mean, both my parents are addicts. I'm an addict. Do I have a disease? I don't think so. I don't feel that I have a disease, and there's absolutely zero evidence ever for a genetic link to addiction. They haven't yet, they've thrown a lot of money at it, but they haven't identified a gene that explains addiction. It would be really, really easy if they did, because they'd say, well, you got a gene, right? So you're screwed. You're an addict. But for me, the analogy I've got is I think it's always your environment, right? So I always think of when we used to do sports day down here, and I'm stood on a white line next to 10 other kids, and you got to run to the other white line up there, and there's a teacher with a starting pistol, and I'm cranked full of adrenaline, and I'm sweating, my heart's pumping. I'm thinking, is that a chemical imbalance? I don't think it is. I think it's situational. I think I'm responding to my environment. And similarly, when people are in pain, and that's really the point with all addiction, I don't think it's a disease. I think it's people who are in pain, and they're using whatever it takes, which can be buying trainers or eating chocolate or taking heroin, to numb out the pain. It's really that simple. So if you take, for example, the Native Americans, I mean, that's quite a shocking statistic, right? We all quite rightly freak out about the Holocaust, where 6-7 million people, which, I mean, it's meaningless, because they told me 600 people are going to be in here today. I couldn't imagine what that is, let alone 6 million. I don't know what that looks like. But we talk about 6 million people dying in the Holocaust, which, by the way, is the amount of people that die from alcohol and tobacco in America every year. So the same amount of people. But that's okay, right? Because cigarettes and alcohol are legal. But between 1492, 1691, 138 million Native Americans were killed by the white settlers. Before the white settlers came, that's where tobacco comes from, right? There's a lot of addictive things around Native American culture. There's things like peyote, cactus, and tobacco, and a whole bunch of other stuff. There's no history of addiction. So it can't be genetic, right? Because the Native Americans, those that are left, are some of the most afflicted by addiction, certainly in America, probably in the world. So what they're doing is they're responding to their environment. They're responding to what happened to them as a people. They're responding to the fact that their land was taken away from them. Their women were raped and murdered. Their families were killed in front of them. They were dispossessed. They were moved into reservations. Their spiritual practice was taken away from them. So they're a whole culture of people that are in deep pain. And the levels of addiction within that culture are rife. I've got no idea how I'm doing for time because I forgot to press the go button on this. Anyway, you might get out early. I guess the important thing really is to look at, because you guys are going out into the world, right? What can you do about this? Some of you will be addicts. Some of you may work with addiction, but what can we do in response to it? I mean, I can't tell you the name of this book. It's a book I wrote, but I can't tell you what it's called because I'll get a Nuna from PJ. But you can work it out. Why did I put that in there? Oh yeah, there's a chapter in this book that I wrote a few years ago that is titled "Hit Your Thumb Repeatedly with a 20-ounce Estwing Sure Strike All Steel Straight Claw Hammer." The reason I give that instruction is because it's clearly mad. But it's no madder than, say you hit I've done it, right, you hit your thumb with a hammer, you stop immediately, you never do it again. It's the message, the whatever it is, neurotransmitter goes straight to your brain and says, don't ever do that again. So you stop. But what we've learned culturally is not to do that when we have an emotion that's painful. We ignore that pain and we keep going, and then eventually people start getting into addictive patterns to try and numb that pain out. So what we got to do is we got to shift our attitude towards pain quite radically if we're going to have a different, I mean, you're never going to cure addiction, right? There's always going to be addiction, there's always going to be pain. It's not about stopping it, it's how you work with it. And I suppose technically I'd be called a recovering addict. I always say I'm not anti-drugs, I'm anti-drug abuse. So drugs have their place, whether it's when you have an operation or you go to the dentist, or drugs have been used for thousands and thousands of years traditionally in native practices. That's cool. If you've got someone that's doing it within your culture, then it's there tends not to be any downsides to it. But as long as we have an avoidant culture around emotional pain, and I think in this country the thing that kills men more than anything else, more than heart disease or cancer, is suicide. Right? This little girl who died on Friday night may well have been suicide. We don't know yet. But suicide's when people can't manage their pain anymore and they don't have anyone to talk to. So that's why I do what I do. And I don't have a technique. If you came and saw me, we'd just have a chat like this. But it's because my belief system is, if you can talk about it, if you can share it, then you're not going to carry that pain as much. The pain over time, it kind of disperses. But in a culture where it's not cool, especially for men, to talk about their pain, then you're going to end up with problems and people are going to find ways to self-medicate. So my opinion, and this is based on, if you look at Portugal, in Portugal I think they decriminalized all drugs in 1992. They have the lowest death rate in the world from narcotics. If you're an addict in Portugal, you're not a criminal, you're someone who's ill. And I think that's what needs to happen. I mean, this is me philosophizing and it doesn't make any difference, but maybe some of you will go out there and be politicians, maybe you'll go out and be lawyers, maybe you'll be Prime Minister, One of the guys in my class is in that famous Bullingdon Club photograph. So, but if you can make an influence, then you've got to recognize that addicts, whether it's shopping addicts, screen addicts, drug addicts, alcoholics, they're not criminals. They're people who are really deeply unhappy, and even pain is subjective. I mean, one of the things that I experience a lot is people will come, I run a lot of groups, and they will sit there and they will say, but my pain's not important because I wasn't raped, or I wasn't beaten, or I wasn't abused. And pain's subjective, it doesn't really matter. For me as a therapist, if you've been raped or abused, my job's easy, because it's very simple. But when I first went into group therapy, I remember sitting there going, well, I know why you guys are all here. These were people, they were quite stereotypical, working class guys, men and women off Glaswegian council estates who'd been beaten through their childhood or abused or whatever. And it really made sense to me, well, why they were there. It didn't make sense to me because I'm white, middle class, I'm from Windsor, and I went to Bryanston, I went to public school. It made no sense to me at all. I didn't even recognize I was in any kind of pain. And my pain is a subtler kind than when you've been abused. I just struggled because I was dyslexic, and I had parents who had their own problems. You know, all of our parents, there's no point in blaming our parents. I'm not blaming my parents. You know, my dad's a bit of a dick, but it's not his fault he's a dick. And my mum's quite a sweet old lady, human beings, and all your parents are human beings, and believe it or not, they have their own issues and they have their own problems, they have their own struggles. So I'm at a stage in my life where I can forgive my parents. But the point is, drugs aren't addictive, and phones aren't addictive, and Facebook isn't addictive. You are addictive if you are someone who's in pain and you get hooked on the dopamine hit that you get from any of these things. Our whole culture is also addictive. I mean, it's what I've been saying, right? That the advertising industry has noticed this. And I was looking at a video. I think some of you guys actually saw this video that they made that's on YouTube, where they dispelled a lot of myths around addiction. So they were saying that in the old days, a lot of the research was based on these experiments they did where they put a rat in a cage with a bottle of heroin water and a bottle of normal water, and the rat drank all the heroin water until it died. And then in the 70s, someone went, hold on a minute, the technology we've got available to us, and low death rates, we're all living longer, and all this kind of stuff. And in many ways, we are very, very successful as a species, but we're also lonelier than ever. So I live on my own in a 1,000 square foot warehouse in North London. 100 years ago, you'd have, I don't know, all my grandparents were families of 6, 7 children, and they'd all live in some tiny little cottage, and you'd think, how would you all exist together in this tiny little space? But the fact is, they lived in tiny little houses together, next door to their neighbours who had tiny little houses living together, and they would all play out on the green, and their aunts and uncles and grandparents would all live around, and they were part of community. I didn't look at what the stats are on addiction then, but I bet they're a damn sight higher now, because we're not living in community. You guys are living in community right now because you're at school, and it's a boarding school, so you live here, and that's, you know, if I look back at what's precious to me about my time at Bryanston is, you know, I got 2 kids because of this place. They wouldn't exist if I hadn't come here. And my ex-wife, because that's what happens when you're an addict, is you get divorced sooner or later. But my ex-wife is one of my closest friends. Me and my oldest daughter are going away on a trip to Nepal together with my ex-wife and my girlfriend next month. So we're all very close, and I put that down to what I learned here, which is the closeness. My friend Will, I'm going for lunch with, I've known him since 1978. My friend Ian, who I spoke to this morning, I've known since I was here. There's a whole bunch of people that became my surrogate family. And we all became addicts together because I guess we all had our own issues, and maybe that's what bonded us, but we all got through it as well. So like I say, I'm one of the lucky ones. No one who ever became an addict, and particularly no one who ever took drugs, ever thought they were going to die, right? Because you guys are all immortal right now, and I was immortal till I was about 35. And I remember the week after I stopped taking drugs, or maybe 2 weeks after, there was an actor, his brother's still alive. His brother's called Joaquin Phoenix. His name was River Phoenix, and he died from an overdose. And I remember reading the toxicology report and looking and going, what a pussy. I mean, it was like, that was a Tuesday night for me. It wasn't even a Friday night. So I was really shocked at what killed him. And then I thought, wow, that means that I could have died. But the whole time that I was using, I never thought I could die. I'm sure this girl on Friday night didn't think she could die. And all the other people I know who've died through taking drugs, none of them were going to die, right? Because you're the ones who aren't going to die. On a kind of positive note, so I've got a tattoo here. Where is it? I had this tattoo put on my arm. So after I stopped using, I became a therapist, had to do a lot of training. One of the training workshops I did was a kind of guided meditation visualization thing. And in this visualization, this character behind me appeared. And he came up to me and he said, I'm your addiction, but I'm also your creativity. And you've got a choice every day. You can wake up and you can be destructive, or you can wake up and you can be creative. So that's my curse. You know, if you ask me, would I want to be cured from being an addict? No way. I'd never give it up. But my curse is I've got to wake up every day and I've got to consciously be creative and positive and direct that furious energy that can destroy me into something positive, and that's why I wouldn't give it up. I kind of forgot about him for about 10 or 15 years, and then I went to India and I was studying in India, and I was in this 5,000-year-old temple down in the south of India, and I looked up at the ceiling and he was on the ceiling. And I said to my guru who was guiding me around, I said, I've seen this before, who is he? And he just looked at me and went, he is you. So I thought, right, I better get the tattoo, and I better remember that message. So every day that I get up, I have to be creative, I have to be positive. And for me, I mean, I've written a few books. There's a couple here that are more self-help books that I brought to give to PJ, even though it's got the word in the title. Maybe you'll stick it in the Bryanston library or something. They're more self-help books based on what I've learned. And the first book, the thinner book, I think I wrote that in 3 weeks. I just blocked out some time from work. I got up every day and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. That's me as an addict. And when I play guitar, I play till my fingers get blistered. You know, when I produce anything, I do it addictively. And that's worth noting, right? Because without addicts, we wouldn't have got to the moon. Without addicts, you know, Shakespeare, to me, I don't know his profile, psychological profile, but the guy's an addict. To kick out that much work, you got to be obsessive compulsive. And obsessive compulsive is the kind of terminology that psychiatrists use like it's a really bad thing. There's no such thing as a bad thing, right? Forget that. You know, I mean, I know that you're governed by rules that you've got to obey, and some laws are really worth obeying, but this thing of right and wrong, when you're looking at the subtler stuff in life, like addiction, there's no right and wrong, it's how you use it. And the technology required to get to the moon, the obsessive compulsive focus and drive to create Shakespeare's work, anything you do, you know, I mean, sport, right? You tell me that someone who wins a gold medal at the Olympics, they're not an addict, I don't buy that. I don't mean they're taking illegal drugs to boost their performance. I mean the practice that takes, the dedication that it takes, even doing your exams, you know, to get into Oxford, you've got to be quite driven in that way that I would say there's a very, very, very fine line between that and an addict. So some of the most brilliant people, this again is why you got this, this kind of cliche of the tortured artist, right? A lot of them are addicts, a lot of musicians are addicts. It's because to be at that level of productivity and creativity, you're going to have that mindset. So it's not all bad. I have no idea how long I've been up here, but I'm going to wrap this up anyway because I've run out of stuff to tell you. So how do we change this? What do we need to do? These are some things that I stole from a video, and I thought as a conclusion it was a good statement. So we are, as a species, right, we're deeply social. We don't do well on our own. We're pack animals, we're tribal. When we feel disconnected or alienated, we experience pain. So that's why when you put someone in prison, because we don't do, and I'm very anti the death penalty, because we don't do the death penalty, when someone's in prison, what do you do if they misbehave? You put them in solitary confinement, because we don't do well when we're in solitary confinement. People have never done well on their own. You need each other. So when we feel disconnected or alienated, we experience pain. You guys have probably noticed down on the bridge, I'm sure it's still there, I haven't been here for about 20 years, but there's that thing chiseled into the bridge that says anyone found defacing this will be transported to the colonies. And that's a terrifying thing for people 200 years ago. Disconnect them as part of the punishment. Exile, you know, you got the death penalty back then. How else do you scare people? With exile from their families, from their communities. Addiction, depression, anger and violence are different ways to react to pain. I think that's a good list to put together, because I think all of these things, I've worked a lot with violence, I've worked a lot with anger, I've worked a lot with depression, I've worked a lot with addiction. People respond in those ways when they're not able to connect with their deeper feelings, when they're not able to be vulnerable. You have to be able to be vulnerable. You have to find people you can be vulnerable with. Don't worry, when I was your age I didn't even know what it meant, but you'll figure it out. To heal our society and our world, we must heal the emotional wounds at the root of our pain. You need to talk. It doesn't have to be someone like me. It doesn't have to be therapy. I'm almost a little bit ambivalent about the career that I've got and the job I do, because I think, really? You need to pay to come and talk to someone? But I guess 100 years ago you could have gone and talked to the priest or the vicar or the wise woman who lived in your village or whatever. But that's what needs to happen if we're going to counter addiction. It's not about, the war against drugs and rules like that and laws. They don't change anything. It's about a whole different approach to emotions. That's it. Thank you. Have a good day.
Look at me, Tara. Tara.
I've done it.
No, I don't think I ever did anything malicious. I just daft things.
Well, it's also a different time.
When I was saying to my kids when we were walking across to the jet, I remember the music.